Welcome to the deep dive, where we take a stack of sources and really try to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge for you.
That's right.
Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating deep dive. We've got writings here that explore the, let's say, nuanced dance between identity, visibility, and protection.
Yeah, we're looking at some pretty deep concepts, things like the vampire door, this idea that stealth is not shame, and a really striking analysis of why sanctions are war when it comes to identity.
Hmm.
It's really all about understanding how your sense of self, your identity can be this incredibly powerful force,
Mm.
but also sometimes how it can make you vulnerable, a target even, in a world that's, well, always shifting.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack these ideas. We want to share some of the historical context from the sources and also look at recent legal developments that show how visibility can be power.
But there's a catch.
Exactly, but only if you understand how, as the sources put it, the pack moves. So get ready for some, I think, surprising facts and moments that might just make you see your own identity and the spaces you use in a totally new light.
Should be interesting.
Okay, so let's jump right into this foundational idea, the vampire door.
Hmm.
Can you maybe paint a clearer picture? What exactly are the sources describing here?
Sure. The author describes it as a kind of portal almost, a threshold you cross where you can be fully seen, like truly yourself, for maybe a few hours.
Okay.
And then just as easily you become invisible again. You slip back into your, everyday life. It's this door that swings both ways. It offers sanctuary, yeah, but also potentially it could be a trap if you're not careful.
And the author's own experience with this, it started in Norwich, England, way back in 1990.
Right.
I love this image they paint. Farmers, still in their muddy wellies during the day, but then at night they slip into a gay disco,
Yeah.
glitter on their collars, the whole thing. And then, crucially, they cloak up and they're gone before dawn.
That really captures it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That fleeting nature.
It really does, the essence of it.
And what's interesting is the author apparently saw something similar even earlier. In D.C., 1988, around DuPont Circle,
Oh, okay.
described as a neon fever dream. Drag races, block parties, fetish shops, just this really vibrant scene.
Sounds intense.
It was a bigger, maybe sweatier vampire door. And the quote here is great. The bar at 7 is a family reunion, but the bar at 11 is the pack.
Wow. Okay, that distinction is key. 7 versus 11.
Definitely.
So the lesson or the takeaway for the author seems pretty clear. Step through when you need to. Slip out before the wolves get curious. This idea of managing your visibility, being strategic about it, that feels really central to everything else.
Absolutely. And it builds,
Yeah.
building on that vampire door logic, the author found something similar happening in the early internet.
Oh, interesting. How so?
In what were called walled gardens, places like the Meta Network, the Well. These weren't just open forums anyone could wander into.
Right, not like today's social media.
Not at all. You needed a password, maybe an invitation. Sometimes you even needed someone already inside to vouch for you.
So it sounds almost like a digital lodge or maybe a fire circle. The author compares it to their Freemason lodge experience.
Exactly. That's the analogy used. The building itself might be public, visible,
Uh-huh.
but when those doors close, there's a guard, literally a man with a sword in the lodge example.
Uh-huh.
And he's not there to hoard treasure
Okay, so why is he there?
because, and this is a direct quote, context is fragile.
Context is fragile. So it's not just about secrecy, but protecting the meaning of what happens inside, the vulnerability.
You got it. That's the core idea, that meaning leaks when the wrong eyes peek.
Meaning leaks.
Yeah. And to leak the lodge or, expose the inner workings of that safe space
Yeah.
is basically to salt the garden.
Salt the garden, destroy the environment.
Exactly. You destroy the very thing that allows for that true connection, that space where you can be fully seen without being, misinterpreted or exploited.
Okay, this next point from the sources, it really challenges a common idea. It's quite provocative. Stealth is not shame.
Yeah, that one makes you stop and think.
What's the strategy behind that statement? What are they getting at?
Well, I think for a lot of people, when they hear stealth, the first thing that comes to mind is fear, right? Or hiding something because you're ashamed.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the author really emphasizes that in this context, it's a deliberate strategy. It's about self-preservation. They use an analogy like a concealed carry instructor saying, the best weapon is the one nobody knows you have.
Oh, okay, so it's tactical.
Exactly. It's about keeping your cloak close. Because, for many folks, the street outside is still 1950. Things haven't changed as much as we might think.
So the goal then of this kind of stealth is often just survival. To stay alive long enough to shout again tomorrow.
That's a big part of it, yeah. But then there's this other concept introduced, the YWP.
The YWP, like Walt Whitman.
Precisely. Walt Whitman's term for that raw, defiant expression of self.
Whitman, sources call him America's big queer bard, writing about hips and lips and alleys. Very embodied stuff.
Very embodied, very unapologetic. But here's the tension the author points out. America seems to love the idea of the YWP, but maybe only when it's safe, when it's embalmed.
Embalmed? How so?
Think, oh, Captain, my Captain. The Whitman poem everyone reads in school, it's acceptable, right? Memorialized.
Yeah, required reading.
But the living, raw, messy, uncontainable YIWP. The sources argue America often hates that, resists it fiercely.
That comparison to uranium is really striking then. It captures that danger, doesn't it?
It really does.
When you get too loud, too visible, you can become uranium. You're radiant, potent, yes, but you're also
the perfect fuel to refine, spin up, and point back at you when the machine decides it's time to push you back under.
Wow, so it's that duality. Your power, your visibility can be turned into a weapon against you by external forces.
Precisely. The power itself isn't inherently the problem, just like uranium isn't dangerous sitting there. It's how it's processed, refined, and directed. Your YAWP, your visible identity, becomes a target for those who want to control the narrative, exploit it, or just shut it down when this system, the machine, feels threatened.
It's a stark warning about visibility without maybe strategic awareness, turning your strength into a liability.
Exactly. And this leads into how these control tactics have evolved according to the sources. We move from just thinking about physical spaces or social pressure to something maybe more insidious in the modern world, financial leverage, economic pressure.
Right. And this is where that concept, sanctions or war, comes into play, but applied internally. The sources point to the Supreme Court's Scrimetti ruling in 2025 as a key example. This upheld Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors.
Yeah, a major case.
How does that ruling, based on our sources, actually function like sanction? How does it turn off the faucet for care?
Well, the ruling itself, it was a 6-3 decision. And it leaned heavily on the idea of states having a compelling interest in protecting minors.
Okay.
It gave states really broad leeway if they just claim health and safety concerns. Now, importantly, it didn't technically outlaw being a trans kid.
Right, not an outright ban on identity.
No, but it starved the care, starved the identity, as the source puts it, by banning access to puberty blockers, hormone therapy for minors within that state. And while it didn't directly ban adult care in that specific ruling, the sources really stressed the potential chilling effect. Restrictions from insurance companies, clinics becoming wary.
And the scale.
The sources note that over half of U.S. states had similar bills proposed or enacted around that time. So it wasn't an isolated thing.
And there's another example from 2025 cited, the Supreme Court decision allowing states to block Planned Parenthood from all Medicaid funding.
Yeah, that was another big one.
And this wasn't just about abortion, right? Because public funds generally couldn't be used for that anyway.
Exactly. This hit contraception, cancer screenings, routine checkups, basic health care for millions who rely on Medicaid and use Planned Parenthood as their provider.
So what was the mechanism there? How did the court justify that?
The key finding, according to the sources, was that individual Medicaid patients cannot sue states for cutting off specific providers like Planned Parenthood.
Okay. So it removed the patient's recourse.
Pretty much.
Well,
it gave states the power to defund based on vaguely defined reasons, like the provider's supposed moral character, which, the sources argue, makes the whole idea of Medicaid offering freedom of choice for patients much more theoretical than real. It's a way to choke off services financially.
And the author draws this direct line. This is the same tactic, the same kind of economic squeeze used against countries like Cuba, Iran, or Russia.
But turned inward, against its own citizens.
Yeah. The system, the pack, demands you amputate the piece that makes us squirm. Cut off the part of yourself or your community that's deemed unacceptable.
And if you won't, or can't.
The pack says, fine, starve. It's stark. It's using economic weapons, essentially, pointed right at identity.
Which brings us right back to that image, doesn't it? The wolves at 11.
Right. Remind us.
The bar at 7 o'clock, that's your found family, your safe space, your sanctuary.
Okay.
But the bar at 11, when things get real, when the outside world's pressures start to seep in or show their teeth, that's the werewolves.
And this pack of wolves, it's bigger than just, people in a bar.
Oh, much bigger. The sources define it broadly. It includes the lawyer with a ballot,
Influencing laws,
the think tank with a donor list,
shaping policy and opinion.
and, maybe most chillingly, the 1950 ghosts still living inside the court, the city hall, your neighbor's vote, these embedded older attitudes.
It's a pervasive force then, often subtle.
Very. And a really critical point the author makes is you just can't extrapolate from the sweaty pride parade to the rest of the country.
Meaning the vibe at a specific celebratory event isn't the whole picture?
Not even close. The pack, those opposing forces, they're always circling. Your YIWP, your authentic self, that's real, it's powerful. But so are the antibodies it summons.
Antibodies it summons. I like that phrasing. So this vibe shift we hear about, it's not just a general mood change, it's more like a societal immune response, specifically triggered by that YIWP becoming more visible.
That's exactly how the sources frame it. It's a reaction, sometimes a backlash, specifically to that visibility. It makes it very clear how just being seen can provoke resistance.
Okay, so it's not a gentle shift, it's a reaction. So given all these forces, these wolves, how do you navigate it?
Well, the sources try to offer some practical guidance. There's a vampire door field guide section and also 10 ways to stay submarine.
A field guide, okay. What kind of places count as vampire doors today?
All sorts, really.
Yeah.
The obvious ones like queer bars, yes, but also house parties, bathhouses, ballrooms. And online, think of those walled gardens again, maybe password-protected forums or Discord servers where you need manual vetting to get in.
Right, controlled digital spaces.
Yeah, and they can even be solo spaces. Your late-night walk, a handwritten diary kept private, anywhere you can be fully you without immediate scrutiny.
And the key insight here, the small truth the author mentions.
Is that a vampire door only works if it stays partly hidden.
Partly hidden.
Yeah. Once you broadcast it, you invite the pack in. And the author is clear. This isn't about being exclusionary just for the sake of it. It's not gatekeeping.
It's garden keeping. That's the phrase used. Can you elaborate on that? Why garden keeping?
Think about a real garden. You tend it, you protect it from pests or harsh weather, right? Not to keep people out maliciously, but to allow specific, maybe delicate things to grow there.
Things that couldn't survive out in the open field.
Exactly. So garden keeping is about nurturing and protecting that specific environment, that context. Broadcasting the location, leaking the lodge, is like salting your own garden. It kills the very conditions needed for vulnerability and true expression.
That makes sense. Protecting the soil, essentially.
You got it.
And building on that, those 10 ways to stay submarine, they sound like practical tactics. What are some of them?
Yeah, they're pretty concrete. Things like keep your close circle small and trusted.
Okay.
Separate your public face from your private garden using an alias, for instance. Can be like armor.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention. Watch for that vibe shift we talked about. Don't dox the door, meaning don't publicly reveal safe spaces.
Right. Protect the garden.
Keep records. Encrypt your communications where needed. Practice blending in. Sometimes the sources mention the gray man mindset.
Free man, just blending into the background.
Basically, yeah, not drawing unnecessary attention when you don't need to. Also, practicing strategic silence, staying connected with your trusted people, and crucially, always remembering that point. Stealth is strategy, not shame.
It's a whole toolkit for navigating potentially hostile environments.
That's the idea.
Now, looking at these recent legal shifts, these strategies, it feels important to remember this didn't just happen overnight. The sources provide a timeline.
Yeah, the historical context is really illuminating. You can trace this thread way back. I mean, the first known U.S. gay rights group, the Society for Human Rights, it was founded and then shut down by authorities way back in 1924.
Wow, 1924.
Then you had groups like the Mattachine Society in the 1950s operating using these small secret cells, essentially, vampire doors.
Right.
And the Daughters of Bilitis, another early group, starting with private house parties for lesbians, again, creating safe, hidden spaces.
Then Stonewall in 1969, the sources call that a moment where the vampire door became a battleground, a flashpoint.
Exactly. A moment of defiant visibility, but also intense conflict.
Later on, you see moments of progress, like the American Psychiatric Association removing homosexuality from the DSM-10 in 1973. That was huge.
Monumental. And then the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. The sources point to the AIDS memorial quilt as serving as a kind of vampire door itself.
How so? A quilt.
As a public record, yes, but also a shield. A way for a grieving, besieged community to make its presence felt, to remember, and to find solidarity, often in the face of public indifference or hostility. It was both visible and protective.
That's a powerful image. And then more recent legal battles. Progress often seemed hard-won, didn't it?
Very. Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015, establishing same-sex marriage rights nationwide. That was a nail-biting 5-4 Supreme Court decision.
So close.
And Bostock v. Clayton County in 2020, extending Title VII workplace protections to LGBTQ workers. That was 6-3. Important victories, but often resting on narrow margins.
Which makes the context for the 2025 rulings we discussed, Scrimetti, the Planned Parenthood funding case, even clearer. They represent a shift back towards restriction using these financial sanctions.
Exactly. It shows how fragile progress can be and how tactics evolve.
Okay, as we talk about these complex legal rulings, there are a couple of key distinctions the sources emphasize, things that often get confused in public discussion.
Yeah, it's important to be precise here.
Can you clarify what these rulings actually did, according to the sources, and maybe just as importantly, what they didn't do?
Absolutely. So it is true that the Scrimetti ruling essentially gave a green light to state-level bans on gender-affirming care for minors. That's accurate.
Okay.
And it's true that the Planned Parenthood decision made it much, much harder for patients to sue states if they get cut off from their chosen Medicaid provider.
Right.
It's also true that both these rulings operate by using funding, or the denial of funding, as leverage, like sanctions used internationally but turned inward. That comparison holds.
Okay, so those are the truth. What about the falsehoods or misconceptions?
Well, it's false, according to the sources, that these bans directly make being trans illegal. They don't outlaw the identity itself.
But they make life very difficult.
Extremely difficult. They starve the care, as we said. They scare clinics and providers. They create immense barriers. But it's not technically illegal to be trans. That's an important distinction in how the mechanism works.
Got it.
And it's also crucially false, the sources warned, to think this won't spread. The playbook, using financial levers, citing moral character or health and safety, can absolutely be copied. And it already is being copied by states targeting different groups or services based on their own particular moral lines. So the impact is potentially much broader.
That's a really vital clarification. Thanks. Wow, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. We've covered so much ground on identity, visibility, protection, exploring how our sense of self exists on this whole spectrum, from the strategic safety of the vampire door all the way to that raw, defiant power of the YAWP, and then looking at how these modern strategies, these sanctions, are being used to push back against that visibility.
And hopefully you've seen that. Understanding things like the vibe shift or the wolves at 11, it's not really about trying to make people afraid.
No, it's about awareness.
It's about strategic awareness. That key phrase again, stealth is not shame, it's strategy. And remembering that context is like a garden, you have to guard it.
That final message from the author really pulls it all together, doesn't it? That dance between power and vulnerability.
It does.
Be careful what you ask for. Visibility is power, but only if you understand how the pack moves. Your YAWP is holy, so is your cloak.
Yeah.
What stands out to me there is how it forces you to rethink visibility itself. It's not automatically good or bad, is it? Its effect really depends on who's looking and why and how.
That's a crucial takeaway. Visibility needs strategy. And if you remember nothing else from our dive today, maybe remember this quote. The vibe shift is real. It always has been. Every vampire door in history has been raided, infiltrated, or exploited when the coordinates leaked.
Sobering reminder.
But they're the hope. But new ones always grow because the YAWP can't be killed, only cloaked. Keep it alive. Guard your garden. Leave before 11.
Leave before 11 before the wolves get curious.
Exactly. It highlights the resilience, the adaptability of identity and community. New sanctuaries emerge even as the landscape changes.
So, thinking about all this, what stands out to you listening right now? How does this idea of guarding your garden, managing your visibility, apply to your own life? Your own communities, the spaces you inhabit, online or off?
Yeah.
It's definitely a profound thought to carry forward as you navigate your own journey through this complex world.